Begin today the Gemara towards the bottom of the Nun Zayin Amud Beis, about 9 lines up from the bottom of the page. Nafla Legina, the Mishnah said an animal that was walking along its way in the Rishus Rabim, and then it fell off the path into a garden on the side of the road, and this was an oinus. The Gemara soon will explain exactly what happened, but an oinus, it fell down. So the owner doesn't have to pay for the damage that it causes because it was an oinus, but venenis, when it fell down, it had hana. Mishalemes mashanenis. You don't pay for the full cost of the damage, but you pay the hana. So we had this before in the Masechta and paid a ketzer de regel that you don't evaluate the full damage. The Gemara there explained you evaluate it with a much less of a value when you're just paying for the hana that it had. So now the Gemara explains what hana did it have here when it fell. Omar Rav, so Rav says benechbeta, that what had happened is it fell down and it got banged when it fell, but it had hana by the fact that if it would have fell on a hard ground, it would have hurt itself. Instead, it fell on a patch of tomatoes or cabbage or whatever it is, and it softened the impact. That's the hana. That's what you got to pay for. Avol ochla, says the Gemara. So what was Rav saying here? Was Rav saying that if the animal then went and ate after it fell there, so afilu mashanenis ein mishalemes. It seems like what Rav is saying is that then what it ate, so not only you don't pay for the damage that happened because it was a oinus that it fell there, but even any hana for this that it ate, you don't pay at all. Now, what would be the reason to make a distinction between the hana that the animal has from the bang, that it got saved from the bang, or the hana of what it ate? So the Gemara tries to explain this. Leimesh, we say, Rav L'Tamei, that what Rav is saying here follows something that he said earlier in the Masechta. The Omar Rav said, and we learned this before, regarding a person that brings fruits into someone's courtyard without his permission. And now the animal of the homeowner went and ate from these fruits, and the fruits that it ate caused this animal to get sick or to die. So in such a case, even though the person brought his fruits there without permission, Rav says that the person that brought the fruits doesn't have to pay for the damage that's caused to the animal. Why not? So here, the explanation Rav said for that is, Hayala shaloi teichal. The animal shouldn't have eaten these fruits, even though I brought the fruits here without permission. But if this animal is doing an act in itself to go and eat it, so then my fruits that were brought there is just a grama. So therefore, you putter for the damage that happened over here to this animal. So now the Gemara is trying to apply the same thing over here and to say that if this animal fell into this property ba'inus, and the hana then that this animal had is that it went and it ate from the fruits there, so you're going to be completely potter to pay for not only the damage but even the hana. Why? Because it fell ba'inus, and then when it ate, it's also something which the animal is doing it on its own, and you can, the Bala Beheme could say, what should I do? The animal shouldn't have eaten. That's what the Gemara thinks to compare from what Rav said regarding the case by a person bringing the fruits without permission. The Gemara immediately says, Omri, on this they said there's no comparison at all. Hachi hashta. When did Rav say this svara of Hayala Shalei Teichal Hasam? Over there, in that case I just mentioned, Hayala Shalei Teichal, when is that? Heiche de Isake He. If this animal that ate these fruits that were brought into this person's property, so then we say that the one that brought the fruits in here, even though he brought it without permission, but nevertheless, the animal that ate it, I don't have to pay for any damage that happens through this. Because the Matzi Amalei Mara de Peri, the owner of the fruits here, can come and argue and say, Le Mishalamna, I'm not paying for the fact that it ate, Hayala Shalei Teichal, shouldn't have eaten. It's an act in itself that it's doing, so I'm just a cause of this. Gemara there said, if the animal slipped in the fruits itself, so that's your fault that you brought the fruits here. But if the animal went and ate from it, over there we say you pot. That makes sense. But la'azuki hi achrine. But in our case, what are we talking about? When the animal fell down into this property, and here it's going ahead and eating in this property, and it's damaging this person's property by eating the fruits here, the petira l'shlume, to say that we use this svara that it shouldn't have eaten as a reason to pater the owner of this animal, mi amar, did Rav ever say such a thing? It doesn't really make any sense. What do you mean, it's eating, and you should pay for the hana that it's eating over here in a property that doesn't belong to it. Why should you be pater for this? So therefore the Gemara explains that Rav meant the exact opposite. Elo rather loy mi Bava Kama. When Rav said that you pay for the hana of this animal that fell here ba'onis, Rav was saying that needless to say, in other words, there's a big chiddush here, as follows. Loy mi Bava achla, needless to say, in a case where your animal fell there ba'onis, and then your animal got up and started eating, so in such a case, definitely you have to pay for this that your animal is eating and is having hana. Why not? For the hezek, you don't have to pay because it fell here ba'onis. And when it gets up and it eats, and the Gemara is soon going to explain exactly what it ate and where it ate. But at for a certain point, we say that what it's eating is an einus, so you don't have to pay. But when the animal fell, and it fell on a soft patch of vegetables or whatever it is, to soften the fall, and it shouldn't hurt itself. So for this, amen, maybe I would say that you don't have to pay for anything, any damage that's caused by this fall to the fruits there. Because why? Because this could be compared to a person that chases away a lion from someone's property. If you come and chase away a lion from someone's property and you prevent the damage that that lion could have done, does the owner of that property have to pay for what you just did? No. You're preventing a damage and you're basically doing a mitzvah. It's a mitzvah. You see a person's property is about to get damaged. Someone's coming to attack his property, and you come and you do a mitzvah to prevent that lion from coming there. You're doing a mitzvah, and you don't get paid for this. So over here, we could similar say, it's not that the animal got up and started eating there. The animal fell. It could have fell and broken its bones and hurt itself. Instead, your cabbage patch, for example, was there and softened the fall. So now, basically, your property is preventing the impact of this fall to stop the damage. So therefore, all you did was a mitzvah to prevent that damage, and therefore, in such a case, you should be patur to pay for him, because he did a mitzvah for you. And even for the hana, you shouldn't have to pay either. Kamash Malon. One second. Gemara is going to explain. Let's see. Kamash Malon. So therefore, the Mishnah over here is saying that your patch of fruits or vegetables softened the fall and prevented the damage. True, you don't have to pay for the damage itself because it fell there ba'onis, but for the actual hana that your animal was saved in this fall, that you do have to pay for. Now, the Gemara explains here, why is there a distinction between mavriya chari, when you're preventing damage by chasing away a lion, and there we say that you're pater, and in our case over here, when you prevented the damage of this animal that fell, why over here do we say yechayev? Maybe I should compare these two cases. So the Gemara here says there's two distinctions. Number one, mavriya chari menichse chaveira. When you're chasing away a lion from your friend's property, midaitehu. This is something that you're choosing to do. Hi, lav midaita. Over here, you're not choosing to do this. This person's animal falls into your property without your knowledge at all. So in such a case, it's not like a mitzvah that I chose to do, and because I chose to do this mitzvah, I can't now charge you for it. Over here, I never chose to do this, so therefore that's something that you could charge for. Inami, another point, mavriya chari minichse chaveiroi les lepeseda. When you chase away a lion from someone else's property, you're not experiencing any loss. There's an effort that you're there to chase away the lion, but you're not actually having any loss because of this. But over here, the fact that your patch of vegetables and fruits stopped the impact of this animal, that it shouldn't get hurt, it's causing you a loss. Your fruits, your vegetables got damaged. So therefore, in such a case, you are going to be chayiv to pay for that damage that you caused. So here, there's a big taisvis when you get to this concept of mavriya chari menichse chaveira. Taisus brings from other places in Shas about this, and Taisus over here basically says that the two answers that the Gemara gives over here, the two reasons why we make a distinction and we don't apply mavriya chari menichse chaveira, both of these answers are true. And Taisus says, if even only one of these reasons are missing, then I consider it to be mavriya chari. In order for it not to be considered mavriya chari, there has to be both of these reasons that the Gemara over here says. That something that you choose to do and something that there's no pseida. But if any of these reasons are missing, then the halacha is going to be that it's mavriya chari. Taisus over here, Taisus brings rayas for this from other places in Shas. We learned one of these in Yanim, in the Gemara Nedarim, when you pay someone else's loan. even without him asking you to pay it. So you did the person a favor. He doesn't have to reimburse you for paying that loan. Taisa says it's this thing of Mavriachiri. You did a mitzvah, you paid his loan. The very fact that you chose to pay that, even though you're having a loss, but if you chose to pay that, he doesn't have to reimburse you. So even though over there you don't have both conditions, it's just the fact that you chose. If you chose to pay it, you're not going to get reimbursed for this. That's one of the details that Taisus brings in the beginning. Okay, now here the Gemara explains the different details about the case itself that we spoke about, this animal that fell into this property. All right, so the first thing is, it said it fell ba'inus, and therefore it's not your responsibility to pay for the full value of the damage. What was exactly the einus that happened when it fell? So Rav Kahana says what happened here is the animal was walking in the street, and then on its own urine it tripped and it fell into the property. That's the einus. Rav says a different einus. It's walking, a herd of animals are walking, and one animal pushes another, and it falls down into this property. Says the Gemara, Rav that says that the case here is that another animal pushed it, and that's the einus. Definitely, if it tripped in its own urine, that's for sure considered to be an einus that you'd be potter. But Rav Kahana that says that it tripped in its own urine, that's called an einus. But if it's a case where one animal pushed another, so then pasha. Then the owner actually is negligent. There's a certain level of negligence here. And and then you do have to pay for the full damage. What's the negligence? Because the Amalei, the owner of the property that got damaged, will say to him, if you're walking with your animals in the street, they should be going in a single file line, not one near the other, that one could push the other. Huh? Okay. So therefore, in such a case, there's a level of negligence. That's not called an einus. Amar Rav Kahana. Another detail about this. So before Rav said that we're talking about the hana. You have to pay for the hana. That's even when the animal was eating over there. Not even. Rav said for sure when the animal was eating over there. So you pay for the hana of that. So now where exactly was the animal eating? That you only pay for the hana and you don't pay for the full damage. So Rav Kahana says, Rav Kahana, Lo shanu ela ba'isa aruga. This animal falls into the property in a certain area. And there, in that aruga, in that patch, in that area, that's where it was eating. But if this animal is already comfortable there, it starts walking from one area to another area in the field, then Mishalemis Mashezika. When it starts eating in another area in the field, so then you do have to pay for another area in the field. That's not the place where it fell. That's not where the einus was. The owner of the animal should get its animal out of there before it goes eating in another area. Right, or according to another pshat, when it eats in another area, that's already considered to be like a different field. It fell into one place, that's one field, then it walks to another place, that's a different place. So for that you have to pay. Rabbi Yechanan Omar, however, Rabbi Yechanan says, no, afile me aruga la aruga. The animal fell into this property, it gets up, it starts eating, it's eating here, it's eating in one patch, it's eating in another patch, another area. Afile kala yankula, even all day, in that field, all around, it's eating. You don't have to pay more than just the hana. You don't pay for the full damage. When do you have to start paying for the damage? Only if the animal comes out and v'tachzar, and it returns ladas. It returns with the knowledge of the owner that allows it, that doesn't guard it properly, and it allows it to go back. Now it's not an einus anymore, so you have to pay for the full damage. All right. So Rabbi Yechanan holds that even if it's eating in another area in this field, you still don't have to pay for the full damage, because the owner of the animal could say, my animal was in your property, I couldn't go into your property, it's a private property, I couldn't go in and get my animal out, and meanwhile it's going from place to place, and I was waiting for my animal to come out, so therefore he's not chayav to pay for any damage that it does in the property. Now the Gemara says, Rav Papa explains this, when it says over here that only when it leaves the property, and then it comes back ladas. So Rav Papa says, Lo teima shetetzi ladas or tachsa ladas. Rabbi Yechanan didn't mean to say that it left, you with your knowledge, you see that the animal came out. And now, tachsa ladas, with your knowledge, you just don't guard it at all, and you allow it to go back. Then you're going to be chayiv. No, there's another, you're going to be chayiv even more. And what is that? Elo, rather, ki v'shiyata saladas. Animal came out. You see animal came out from this property. So now, even if you are going to guard your animal properly, and the animal is still going to somehow find its way back to this field, you're still going to be chayav for this, even though you guarded it. My time. Why should you be chayiv even though you guarded it? The Amalei, because the owner of the property here that got damaged will tell you, Kivin the Yalfe, since your animal already had a good time in this place, in this field, it knows this place, Kolem is the Mishtamtel Hasam Rato. However, whenever it finds an opportunity to slip away, it'll run back over here to this property. So basically what Avpap is saying is, once your animal damaged someone's property, now, a basic shmira, what we learned in the beginning of the parak, a shmira pechusa, a basic shmira, just to close the door of the barn, not to allow your animal to go there, is not going to be enough to guard it from not going there. Because this animal knows this place and it's going to do whatever it can to slip away and go there. You're going to have to do a shmira mu'ula, an extra special shmira that it shouldn't go there. So therefore, even if it was shalai ladas, you did a good shmira, but you didn't do an extra special shmira, you're going to be chayav for the damage that it does over here.
And with a regular shmira, you're not?
With a regular shmira, you're gonna be chayiv. If it's a regular shmira, you're still gonna be chayiv because the animal has a tendency to go back there. So once it has that tendency to go back there, you have to do an extra good shmira to make sure that it doesn't go. Yarda kedarka. Then the Mishnah said that what's if with an animal that goes down into a property, kedarka, no einus, it's just walking, it's going into someone else's property, vizika, and it damages the property. Then mishalem is mashizika, you have to pay the full damage that it did, that it ate in this person's property. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the boy on this, yarda kedarka. If the animal goes down normally, in other words, there's a pshia here, you allow the animal to go down into someone's property, but then what happened is it didn't eat there. The way the animal caused damage to the produce in this field is because it gave birth there, right there in the field. And then the water that comes out with the birth, that causes damage for the produce there. Mahu. What's going to be the halacha? Is the owner of this animal responsible for this? So the Gemara explains what the boy is based on. Now, first of all, according to the opinion that we learned before, when there's a case where it started off with your negligence, then the seifei ba'inus, but then in the end, something happens which is beyond your control. Chayev. But in such a case, you're still chayev. So then over here, there's no question that you're going to be chayev. The fact that you allowed the animal to go there is your negligence. The fact that then it gave birth there, which is something you didn't expect, but it doesn't matter. It's all a result of the presence of the animal being there, which comes from your pshia. So you're going to be chayev for this. What was Rabbi Yirmiyah boye? The opinion that says that if it began with a negligence, but then something else develops which is beyond your control, that you potter. So what's going to be the halacha in this case? Do we say that this is also similar? In the beginning it was a negligence, you allowed your animal to go there, but then it gave birth and that's what you didn't expect. It's beyond your control, so it's a nainus. So potter. Or maybe we should say, no, this is not a nainus. The entire thing is considered to be your negligence. Because the kivin de kachazi, since the owner of this animal sees the krevel that it's close to giving birth, he knows that this animal is pregnant for a while and it's going to give birth sometime soon. So you should be guarding it and tending to it and paying attention to see exactly when it's giving birth. And therefore, if it goes into someone else's property and it gave birth there, it's not a total shock. It's something that the person should have expected. So it's all his negligence that the water of this birth damaged there. Teiku, the Gemara does not answer this ibaya. The next thing is said in the Mishnah was, Keitzad mishalemes mashi zika v'chulu, when your animal eats a portion of someone's property, so how do you evaluate the damage that happened over there? So the Mishnah said, Shamin beis sa ba'isa sada. So you evaluate the beis sa. A beis sa is the area which is 50 by 50 amas, and that's how you evaluate to pay the damage. So the simple point of what the Mishnah here is saying is, when you evaluate the damage, you don't just evaluate the value of this area itself where it ate. Because if you're going to evaluate the value of the damage, that damage itself, the value of the damage is going to be very, very high. Because such a tiny little area that it ate, if you want to sell that area of the property separately, because it's such a tiny area, so it's sold for a very expensive price. Someone that's very poor might be able to buy only such a kind of field and not something else, and that they can charge them very expensive, and therefore if you evaluate that itself, it's going to be a very high value that the mazik is going to have to pay for the damage. That's not how you evaluate. But as the Gemara here is going to bring, we learn out from a pasuk that we evaluate this one area in contrast to a larger area. how much was this larger area of the field, how much did its value go down when that one little area inside the larger field is missing? And then over there, the value of the damage is going to come out to be much less. So first the Gemara brings the source for this in the pasuk, and then later the Gemara is going to explain exactly how you evaluate this. So what's the source for this? The pasuk says Ubir bizdei acher. Animal ate bizdei acher in someone else's property. What do we learn from this? Melamed sheshamin al gav stei acher. You evaluate the damage, not just the place itself that it ate, but al gav, in contrast to, in connection with the entire area, sada acher, the whole entire field over here, and you see that area that it ate, how the whole value of the whole field went down because of this one area. That's what we learn from this. So the Gemara asks, "Hayu bir b'zdei acher," but this pasuk of a bir b'zdei acher mibayele, we need this to teach me a different basic halacha regarding the damage of shein v'regel, and that is we had many times in the Masechta la fukir shusarabim, to say that you only pay for the damages of the animal when it eats or tramples when it's done in someone's private property, and not when it's done in the Rishus Harabim. So how can we learn two different things from the same pasuk? Answers the Gemara, in Cain, if that's what we would be learning out to exclude the damage caused in the Rishus Harabim, lichtav rachmane obir b'zdei chaveirei. The pasuk should use a different, more usual term, that it came and it ate in the sada of your friend. Why does it say acher? It's an unusual term. What's the meaning of acher? Inami, or another thing that's point that we can see here in the pasuk that there's an additional thing to learn out. Zdei acher. It should have said ubir zdei acher. It ate a sada from another sada. My bizdei acher, within this field. It's from here, so either from the word acher or from the bizdei acher. From here we learn out this additional drasha, sheshamen al gav sada acher, that you evaluate within the field, the one area, in contrast to the whole field, how much the value went down. That's how you evaluate. That's how we learn this other drasha here. Now the Gemara asks the opposite question. So if so, from the language of the pasuk, you see that the drasha here is coming to say this point of how you evaluate the damage within the field. So maybe that's what this whole pasuk is written for. How do we know also to learn the other drasha to teach us that if the damage is in a Rishus Harabim, you're going to be potter? Says the Gemara, no, we have an indication that it's coming to teach that as well. Because in Cain, if it's only coming to say this drasha, how you evaluate the payment, so then this diuk of bizdei acher should have said by the place in the pasuk where it talks about the payment, which is where it says meitav sadeyu or meitav karma yishalem bizdei acher. Here where it talks about the payment. So here the pasuk should add this words of bizdei acher to say that the way you evaluate the payment is within the field, not just this one area itself, but in contrast to the whole field. That's where the word should have belonged. Why is it Torah writing the term bizdei acher when it talks about how the damage originally happened? So from this we understand that we also have to dash from this the location of where the damage happened, that is only in a private property and not in the Rishus Harabim. So we can learn out both things over here from the place where the pasuk writes it. So we see that it's also talking about where the damage actually happened, but from the wording of the pasuk that it says bizdei acher, I also understand that it's talking about how you evaluate the actual damage itself. Okay, now the Gemara comes back, as I said, to explain better how you actually evaluate here this damage. Hey Chishayminon, so how do you evaluate this? Okay, so what exactly is the Gemara's question? It already said in the Mishnah, didn't it? The Mishnah said that when you evaluate the damage, so you have one area in the field, so instead of just evaluating this one area itself, you evaluate it in contrast to a bigger size field. And what was that bigger size field? The Mishnah mentioned what that bigger size is. A base saw, an area which is a saw, which is 50 by 50 amas. But the Gemara does not accept that pshat. The Gemara over here says, no, you have to evaluate it differently. First, let's see the words of the Gemara, then I'll explain what Rashi says here, why the Gemara is saying a different pshat. Rabbi Yosef bar Chanina says, sa'a b'shishim sa'in. You evaluate this one saw and see what the value of this saw is in relation to 60 saw. Okay, so meaning you can't first look at what the value of a saw is. The first thing is you have to look at how do I evaluate the value of a field, the size of a saw, when it's part of a larger field. When it's part of a field, it's the value of 60 saw. So Rashi here explains as follows. If you're going to just look at the value of the field itself, of a field that's the size of a saw is not that big. 50 by 50 amas is not that large. If you're selling a property that's that kind of a size, it's a field that a poor person looks to buy. Dafka, a poor person looks to buy. It's not large enough for a rich person to buy. It's an area which a poor person wants to buy. So if only a poor person would buy this area, so therefore they take advantage of him. They know that only he is going to buy it and nobody else is interested in buying it. So therefore he's going to have to end up paying an expensive price for this base saw. So therefore, if you're going to evaluate just that base saw alone, you're going to end up with a very high price with this base saw. So therefore, if you're going to charge the mazik to pay for the damage that happened in this area in relation to a base saw is going to be evaluated very high. So when the Mishnah said evaluate in relation to the base saw, the Mishnah couldn't have just meant in relation to this base saw. Rather, what does the Mishnah mean to say? The first thing you have to evaluate is 60 saw. That's a larger field. A larger field which is not so expensive. The way you evaluate 60 saw, that's something that more people are interested in buying. There's more buyers for it, so the price is lower. So now you evaluate what's the value of a saw within a base saw. Again, a saw within 60 saw, that is. Okay, so now the value is more normal, it's less. Okay, now then, once you have that level of value of the base saw, now you evaluate this one aruga, this one area of damage within this base saw, and that's what the mazik has to pay. Okay. So you want to make sure that you get the proper value of the base saw. It shouldn't be too expensive. The value of the base saw in relation to 60 saw. And then once you have that proper value of the base saw, now you could evaluate that one little patch which is within the base saw. Okay, that's Pshat Gemara here. Just one more point that Rashi explains. If so, why don't we just simply say that evaluate this one little area in relation to 60 saw? Why do you have to go 2 steps? So Rashi says, if you're going to evaluate one little area in relation to 60 saw, so then the value of this damage is going to be minimal, tiny, a little aruga, a little patch in a field in relation to a shishim saw. If it's missing this little aruga, the damage is going to be considered to be very minimal. So the mazik is going to have to pay pennies, nothing. So therefore, you have to evaluate the damage of the aruga in relation to the base saw. So then the damage has some value that he's going to have to pay something. But you don't want the value of that base saw, which if you evaluate it separately, to be inflated because it's a kind of property that only an ani buys. So you have to evaluate the base saw properly. So it has to be in relation to the 60 saw. But once you get the value of the base saw right, so now you can evaluate this one patch in relation to this base saw. Okay, so there's 2 stages over here to this evaluation. Rabbi Yanai says a similar thing, but it's not really the saw in contrast to 60 saw, but it's a tarkiv b'shishim tarkavim. A tarkiv is a half a saw. So you evaluate first what the value of the tarkiv is in relation to 60 tarkavim, and then you evaluate that what area within the tarkiv that was damaged. Chizkiya says, Chizkiya doesn't hold to this, that you evaluate these 2 evaluations. Chizkiya just says kelach b'shishim klochim. If you ate one kelach, one stalk, so you evaluate. You don't just pay the value of this stalk for itself, because then that value could be very high. But you evaluate the value of 60 stalks. How much does its value go down when you're missing one? That's how you evaluate it. Okay, but not Chizkiya doesn't hold these 2 levels that we just said, 60 and one saw, and then the patch in it. One and 60. That's it.
The Mishnah said saw, no?
Yeah, and a Chanami. The Mishnah said a saw. Yeah, a saw. Yeah.
According to the first one.
Yeah, I'm not sure how Chizkiya fits into the lashon of the Mishnah. Okay. So the Gemara here brings from what it says in the Braise, Meisvei. So the question was asked on all of these opinions. The Braise says, Ochla kav kabaya. The animal ate 1 kav or 2 kav. And we don't say to shalom demeyan that you pay the value of what it ate, of how much this produce that it ate would be sold in the marketplace. Which means once you detach it from the ground, you bring it to the marketplace, you don't evaluate there how much it sold. You evaluate it in its patch in the field when it's still attached to the ground. And you evaluate it when it's attached to the ground, what the loss over here is. So now it seems like all the Braisa is saying is that when you evaluate what an animal eats, don't evaluate it when it's detached, sold in the market. Evaluate it in the ground, when it's attached. What's the loss in the ground itself? Now, but my love, don't you think what the Braisa is saying is bifnei atzma, that you evaluate it for itself? I don't evaluate it in relation to a larger area. I for sure don't evaluate it in relation then to say that this larger area, you have to see what the value of that is in relation to 60 saw. None of that. You just evaluate this itself. So the Gemara says, loy, and that's not what the Braisa meant. Bishishim. The Braisa doesn't spell out all the details. It's saying that point that you don't evaluate the damage, how it's sold in the marketplace. You evaluate the field itself. Regarding evaluating the field itself, that the Braisa doesn't spell out. But over there, like the Amiroim over here said, that you evaluate it based on the value of area, which is 60 saw or 60 tarkiv. Different opinions over here that we had before. Or shishim klochim, right? Another opinion, right? Now we learned in the Braisa the following statement: Ein shomen kav mipnei shemashbichai. You don't evaluate a kav because mashbichai, you're going to be mashbiachim. Now, okay, we'll see what this means in a second. V'lei beis kor, and you can't evaluate a beis kor mipnei shepoigmai, because you're going to cause them a loss. Now, who exactly is gaining and who's losing, and what exactly this Braisa is saying? The Gemara here brings two pshatim. My Kama, what is this Braisa saying? Rav Papa says as follows: Hachi Kama. The Braisa here is saying two different halachas, and it's based on the point that we said before, that when you evaluate a small area in a property, you have to determine the value of this small area in relation to a bigger area. In order to get to evaluate it right, you have to see it in the bigger picture of the bigger area that it's part of. And therefore, the Braisa is saying is as follows: Ein shomen kav b'shishim kavin. You can't evaluate one kav, if it ate one kav, in relation to 60 kavim. Why not? Nipnei shemashbiach mazik. Because in such a case, the mazik is going to end up gaining. Why is he going to end up gaining? Because nobody wants to buy it, so therefore the value of it is very, very cheap. If no one's interested in buying it, so because the value is very, very cheap, so what ends up happening is the mazik that's going to pay the damage for this is going to have to pay very, very cheap. Because this area of a kav, within 60 kavim, an area of 60 kavim, has a very, very cheap value when you're selling it, because nobody's interested in buying it, so he's going to end up paying very little, so the mazik is going to end up gaining. That's the pshat of here. Okay. Now, on the other hand, the second part of the Braisa, v'loi kor b'shishim kurin, and you can't evaluate also a core within 60 kurin. Now, this is a very, very large area. A core and 60. A core is 30 saw, right? And 60 kurim is a very, very large area. So if you're going to evaluate such a large area, so then what's going to end up happening is mipnei shapayga mazik. Over here, the mazik is going to end up paying a very, very expensive price for the damage that he causes. Why? Because over here, this is someone that is very rich and wants to expand his properties, is very, very interested in buying this property. So there's a lot of rich people, the people that could afford, that are interested in buying such a property. So therefore, this is a property that has a very, very high value. So if you're going to evaluate the property that's so large, you're going to end up evaluating it very high. And therefore, and besides that, the area of the core within Shishim Kurim, it's a very big area. And if you evaluate the damage over there of this core within Shishim Kurim, it's going to end up being a value of a very, very high value of damage. So therefore, Paigim Mazik, the Mazik is going to have to pay for this. He's going to end up losing out a lot and paying a very high value. So therefore, you can't evaluate it this way. Okay, so again, the point that the Gemara basically is saying over here is, you have to go back to what we said before. What we said before is that you evaluate a saw in contrast to Shishim Son. That's the perfect size that Chazal will Mishayer that you have to evaluate to get the right value of a property. Why? Because a saw, in contrast to Shishim Son, is not too large, it's not too small, it's not an area which is too small and therefore it has very little value. It's not an area which is way massive and therefore it has a very, very large value. A saw, in contrast to Shishim Son, is an in-between size, which is an area which you can get the right balanced value for this place, not too expensive and not too cheap. And then the mazik is going to end up paying the right damage that he deserves to pay. That's what this Braisa was saying, according to Rav Papa. But on this, the Gemara asks, Maskav la Rav Huna. Rav Huna asks a question, Rav Huna bar Manoach, that is, Hi v'loi base core. Why does the Braisa change its expression? Why does it use the term base core? V'loi core mi bayale. It should have said not a core. In the beginning of the Braisa, it said kav. It didn't say base kav. So why in the afterwards does it say a base core? A kav is usually an expression that's used for a certain volume of a certain amount of how much produce could you get out of the property. Same thing, core. Core is a certain volume of how much you can get out of the property. What's base core? Base core is a measurement of an area. A base kav would be a measurement of the area. So this brisa is switching its lashon. According to Rav Papa, that the beginning of the brisa is saying one point, the end of the brisa is saying similar point, that it should have used the same lashon. Why is it switching the lashon? So therefore, Rav Huna bar Manoach says, "Mishmei de Ravacha berei de Ravika hachi katani." The pshat in this brisa is different. Ein shamin kav bifnei atzmai. You don't evaluate the kav for itself, which means if an animal damaged an area of a kav, you don't evaluate the damage of that area for itself. Like we said before, this is the halacha basically that it said in our Mishnah. You don't just evaluate that area itself, you have to evaluate it in relation to a larger area. Because if you're going to just evaluate that area itself, when the Braisa says mashbichai, who is mashbicha referring to? Not the mazik, it's referring to the nizik, because then the nizik is going to gain. Because as we learned before, when you evaluate just this area for itself, then the value of its damage is going to be very high. So the nizik is going to gain and get paid too much for this damage. And on the other hand, v'loy kav b'beis kor, and if the animal damaged one area of a kav, and now we know that you have to evaluate it in contrast to a bigger area, so to get the right payment of the damage here. But what's that larger area that you're going to evaluate it against? If you're going to evaluate it against a base core, which is a very big area, so then that's also incorrect, because then it's in the opposite extreme. If they should paygim nizik, because then the nizik is going to lose out. Because you're evaluating it in contrast to such a large area, so then this one area that it damages is tiny in contrast to that large area. So the nizik is going to get paid very little. Ella, rather you evaluate it, like we said before, b'shishim. If it's one kav, you could evaluate it in contrast to 60 kav. And then you're going to get the right payment, not too cheap for the mazik, not too expensive for the mazik. It's going to be the right amount. That's the halacha that's Bryce was saying, which is basically the point that we learned before. 1 against 60, that gives you the right kind of payment, but it has to be 1 kav against 60 kav. The Gemara says there was a person that cuts kashpe mechavre. He cut off the palm tree of his friend's property. So Asala Kameh the Reish Galusa, they came to the Reish Galusa to paskin and to evaluate how he has to pay for this palm tree that he cut down. Amalei. So he said, "L'didi chazili, I saw over here, this area in this field, v'tilsa, talasa, bekina, Bava Kama. There were 3 trees that were here in this area. Avashavim mei zuzi. The total value of all 3 trees was 100 zuz. So therefore, the Reish Galusa says, zilv havle, tlasen, v'tilsa, v'tilsa. So give him the value of the tree that you cut down. So if all 3 are worth 100, so one tree is worth 33 and a third. That's what you should pay. So he basically told to pay the full value of this tree for itself. He didn't evaluate it in relation to the rest of the property or anything else. Everything that we learned till here about evaluating in contrast to something else, that's not how he evaluated it. He said, no, go pay full value of this tree that you cut down. So Hama, this person said, Gabi Reish Galusa, the don, dinner de parsa. Here, by this Reish Galusa, he paskins a halacha of evaluating how you pay, like the Persians would paskin. That you pay for the value of this tree for itself. Lamali, why should I go to him? Why should I paskin like him? So Asla Kamed Rav Nachman, he went to Rav Nachman. Amalei, so Rav Nachman said, B'shishim, that you evaluate this area, this tree that you cut down, in relation to 60 trees, or the area of Shishim Sa, but you don't just evaluate this tree for itself. That's what Rav Nachman paskin. So on this, Amalei Rava says, Im Amru beniske memainai, this rule that we said, that we learned out from a pasuk, which is talking about an animal, your money, that's mazik someone. If it's said over there in that pasuk regarding your animal, that's mazik, that you don't just pay the value of what it ate, but you pay it in contrast to the value of the whole entire area of 60 sa. Yamru beniske gufa, is it the same when you damage with your very own hands? Over here, this person himself cut off the tree. Maybe when a person himself cuts off the tree, over here he does have to pay the full value of this tree itself that he cut off, not in relation to anything else, but just this value itself. Okay, so now the Gemara over here says, no, even by Niske Memaina, you also have to pay, by Niske Gufay. Gemara says, it brings here the source, is there a reason to make a distinction between Niske Memaina and Niske Gufay? So Amalei Abaye Rava, Abaye says to Rava, Niske Gufay mai daitech. regarding Niske Gufay, when a person damages with his own body, with his own hands, what are you thinking? Why do you think to say that in such a case you pay the full value, not in contrast to the 60 that there is here? Because we learned in a Braise, Hamafker, Karma shel Chaveiroi, a person that damages, he ruins the vineyard of his friend, Smadar. And the grapes are still smadder. They're still what?
Budding.
They're budding. They're not ripe grapes yet. They're just budding. So how do you evaluate the damage that you did over here? You look at the value of how much it was worth before your damage and how much it's worth now, and that's how you evaluate the damage. Okay, so and that's all it says. Okay, which means that you have to see that how much this property could be sold before the damage and how much it could be sold after the damage. In this Braisa, where it's talking about a person, not an animal that damaged. When the person damaged with his hands, it doesn't say anything about contrasting it to 60 to more in the larger size of this field. It doesn't say that. So therefore, from this, we could learn out that the halacha that we said until here, that you evaluate in contrast to a larger area, only applies to an animal that damages, not when a person damages. Okay, but the Gemara though brings in another Braise here regarding a behemah. Don't we find that by an animal, when the animal damages, that it's also, we find that the Braise talks about the payment for the damage of the animal. It doesn't spell out clearly that the payment has to be in contrast to a larger area, 60 times of what the damage was, and nevertheless, that's what the Braise there means. So therefore, the fact that in this Braise, where it talks about a person damaging, it doesn't spell out this detail, it doesn't mean that the halacha won't be the same, that you always evaluate in contrast to 60. Okay, here there's a lengthy Braise, and the Gemara later will explain the details of all this Braise. Okay, we'll leave it for the next time. We'll see the details of this Braise.
The damage